This is the lock-on effect. You may have seen it in a number of commercials, Dre Beats being one that has been used a lot. But it's I love this effect. And this is how it looks. Now, believe it or not, there was no camera movement or very little camera movement in this actual original footage. But what this does is it locks on to a certain point in your frame and moves everything else around it. And in this chapter, we're going to find out how to do it in just really a couple of clicks. However, there are some things to learn here too. So yeah, get yourself a coffee or a drink, whatever beverage of choice you have, and let's get in to the lock-on effect. So how do we get this effect? Well, it's a really well used effect. It's not used that often. You may have seen it in like the Beats commercial, and when done properly, it's a great effect. So I've got the footage from Motion Array. Motion Array isn't the only source for stock footage that I use, and I will be covering another one that I absolutely love, and it gives you more options in the future. But for a quick clip, this is perfect. So I've selected this clip, which is woman on a treadmill. Just inspiring labeling, but it tells you what you need. So we're going to start a new sequence. We haven't done one of these for a bit, so just to cover this as well, I've gone into my bin. You don't have to do this, but I do like to try and keep it as clean and tidy as possible. But as you can see, these things kind of get away from us. So I'm going to go into my bin, sequences, Control N, and I'm going to call this lock on effect. I have my custom sequence of 1080 25 FPS and hit OK. Cracking. So that's the start. And then going to, what is that, 60 FPS? This is a 60 FPS track. So for these purposes, I might actually accept that and explain why. But let me get, I've taken the liberty of downloading it already. And this now says the clip does not match the sequence's settings. Change sequence to match the clip settings. In this time, I'm going to say yes. And that's because I want all of those 60 frames a second. And I'll show you why. So I'm going to change sequence settings and it's going to obey those. Okay. So here is our clip. I'm just going to let it, just going to drag it forward until her full face is in shot. I'm going to start about there. And yeah, okay, let's just drag it to the end. By the way, I hit Q on the keyboard to trim the beginning, and I don't necessarily need all of this. Let's just get it until she looks down. Go on, look up. There, that's enough to show this. So I'm going to hit W on the keyboard to trim everything at the end. Okay, so what do we do now? Well, we take it into After Effects. But before we do that, just make sure that your After Effects composition is open. If your After Effects project is open, that is if you're working in a pre-existing project. Because if not, when you right click and open After Effects within Premiere Pro, it'll try and open a new one, which is fine. But if you want to work in an existing one, so we're in this one, which is the one we've been working in before. Remember our mate that we tracked, it will try to open a new one. And when you select this one, so say we have Premiere Pro animations, and we selected this one, it would try and overwrite it, and we don't want that. The way to easily get around that is purely just to have the project open that you want to work in. So going back, remember we hold Alt and drag up and let go, and we duplicate it. So we're affecting the new track, not the one below, just so we're not, we don't have to go back if anything goes wrong or we decide we don't want this. We can just delete this top bit and we still have the original at the bottom. It's no biggie with, just a single clip in a sequence. But if you had a massive sequence with loads of things and you made that decision, it's not too easy to rectify it. So best practice, if you're doing anything in After Effects, just duplicate it. And don't forget, just remember in this one, we don't even have any of the video on this track. We just have the graphics. And if we, just to make it easier for Premiere Pro, and if we didn't have that, we wouldn't have anything. Does that make sense? I think so. So we're going to go into here and right click our top clip and replace with After Effects composition. What this does, as you've seen it before, it drags it into here, or exports it into After Effects, creates a new composition here and places our footage in there. Now, why did I say yes to allowing for new settings in here? Well, that's because I wanted to use all of those 60 frames, because if we scrub along here now, and if you look, there's very little motion blur. There's a little bit in her hands. Yeah, there. So if you look at her hands are blurred there. And that all comes down to shutter speed. So if we're talking shutter speed and the 180-degree rule. So the 180-degree rule is shooting double your frame rate. So say this was shot at 30 frames a second, which I'm kind of thinking it might have been because we've got motion blur. Sorry, if it was shot at 60 frames a second, which is what this is, I'm assuming that the videographer, whoever's behind the camera, has set his camera or her camera to 120th of a second. What that does is that anything faster than that, and you won't get this blur, which is kind of what we want. But to make things more natural, you kind of want a bit of motion blur. You see, when our hand is kind of in the same area for more than a couple of frames, it stabilizes and we get a clean shot. But as she starts to move again, it goes blurred. So if you're ever shooting your own footage that you want to be able to track cleanly and easily, I'm not anticipating too many problems because I've seen already where we're going to track. But if you want it as clean as possible, I'd take that shutter speed right the way up. Obviously, a higher shutter speed, you get less lighting, so you might have to compensate with ISO or a wider aperture, but it will give you a cleaner footage to be able to track from. But again, I don't think we're going to have a problem here. So let me just check if right at the beginning I think we've probably got enough on that frame to track, but I'm going to move here. So we're going to start tracking from right in the beginning. And where I'm looking is on her nose. And the reason why I said I think we've got an okay place to track is because if I zoom in by scrolling up and hold down the space bar and drag down just to change our viewing, it doesn't move around the track. It just move around the clip. It just moves around within the actual display. And if I look here, I'm going to be tracking her nose because we have shadow in here, which is what we're looking for. We're looking for contrast. But most importantly, we've got different skin tones around here. And then we've got black, or pretty much all black, which gives us that contrasting colors. Contrasting colors. And that means that anything to the right of her nose, as we're tracking through, the tracking software will automatically go, no, that's not what we're trying to track. And if we track something as close as we can to this black, that will keep us in line. What would be lovely is if she had a beauty spot or a mole, because it would show up really dark against her lighter skin tone and we could just track that, which is always really handy. If you've ever seen the Dre Beats advert where it has very similar to this, they will track right on their earphone, not just because that's the product that they're trying to sell, but also whoever was wearing it, it was contrasted massively against their skin tones. But yeah, we will track with what we can. So we're going to track her nose. And whoever this model is, apologies, we're going to get like really close to your nose. It's a lovely nose. So, I don't know why I'm apologizing. So we could track motion, but that's not what we're going to do here because the lock-on effect is a version of stabilization. But it's not warp stabilizer, which we actually haven't covered yet. And it's the main stabilizer for footage. We'll cover that in another chapter, but we're going to use stabilize motion. So with our track selected, we're going to click this and watch what happens. We go like way in. If I zoom out, you can see how small our track point is. So it's placed our track point there and it's pretty much in the center. So what do we do? Okay, well, we need to move this. So we need to zoom in a little bit so we can actually see. And then I'm going to grab somewhere. Where I'm looking to grab is somewhere in this inner box, but not the cross. Okay, so I'm going to start moving. and I'm going to drag up here a little bit, and okay, too far, and we're going to drag here. Okay, let go. So we're kind of in this space. That's not exactly where we're going to track. However, see this this cross. When you start dragging, I know we've covered this before, but just to kind of doubly explain this, we turn into a kind of magnification, and the cross turns to an X. You see that? If I let go, it goes back to a cross, but once I start dragging, it goes to an X. I never noticed that until I've started to really pay attention to this to teach you guys. And what I'm going to do is I'm aiming for this area here, right towards the end of the nose. I don't want to get the tip of the nose, because if we look here, it's pretty much the same skin tone, although a few highlights all the way around the edge of her nose. So I'm trying to give the tracking engine a little bit of contrast, at least. So we're going to track right at the end of her nose. And then what we're going to do is this will slow down the tracking process, but it will give us a cleaner and more accurate track. So I'm going to open up this bounding box all the way to kind of cover most of her nose. Then I'm going to open up this bounding box. So just to reiterate what these do, this sets the bounding box I want to track within here, and more specifically, I want to track that cross. What this bounding box is saying is between frames, or maybe multiple frames, keep an eye on this area, because what we're trying to track may venture into those areas. Okay? Well, there's no time like the present. We need to just start tracking and see if this is correct. So we first go to our options, and remember, I always have it to stop tracking. The default is adapt feature. I don't see why you would want to adapt feature, because that says if the confidence is below a certain point and we think that we're losing our track, we're just going to kind of make it up as we go along and do our best guess. It's kind of not what we want for this effect, and I can't think of an effect that you would want this. But anyway, I've got it at stop tracking. So if anything goes wrong, or it thinks, oh, I've lost it, it will just stop. And I can decide what I need to do about it. The default confidence is 80%. So that means if it's anything less than 80% sure of that's what we want to track, it will stop tracking. Okay. Depending on how accurate you want your track, you could take this higher to almost like 90% or 100%. You'd be there all day. But I'm going to leave it at 80% and see where we get with that. So if I click OK, and now is the moment of truth. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit so I can just one click, just so I can see everything. And because we're in the center, pretty much the center of the track, I'm going to analyze backwards first. So this is by frame, and this is just to press play, but in reverse. So let's see how we get on. So I'm going to analyze backwards. Now again, this is going to take a bit of time. As you can see, it's going frame by frame, but it seems to be keeping up quite well with her nose. This, seriously, if you start something and it stops straight away, it could literally be the bounding boxes that have to be just tweaked a little bit. So don't just give up hope. Just play with it a little bit and see where we're at. And that has not stopped tracking, and it's done it all the way. Brilliant. Now we want to track forward of this position. And now we could drag. Nothing's been set in stone, by the way. We just have the information. Now we could just drag until we see it stop in tracking and then move back a bit. You see how our nose is moving on its own. Also, if you look here, as I drag forward, these little bits start to disappear. And that's so it only keeps up to a certain amount. And it's just so by the end of your footage, depending on how long it is, you can't, if there's a lot of movement and there's a lot of footage before long, you can imagine this whole frame is just taken up by key points. So I'm going to drag this back a little bit, but I'm not. I'm going to use a little shortcut, and that shortcut is U on the keyboard. And what this does is, if I've got the clip selected, which already has these set track points, which are also keyframes, and this is what this shortcut does, we want to reveal keyframes. So to do that, we have the clip selected, and by default, and I've never changed this, I just remember it, you press U on the keyboard, and all of a sudden we've brought up all of our keyframes. And what we can see here is that we have feature center, confidence, and attach point. We don't really care about that. We just see the fact that we've got loads and loads, if I zoom in, loads of keyframes here. Why have I brought up this? Well, remember in Premiere Pro, remember this image or these buttons? Well, you can see that we can set a keyframe, we can go to the next keyframe, but we can't because there's no keyframes to the right of it. But we can go back to the previous keyframe. And if I click that once, that's where we started. So now we can track forward from here, knowing that when we get to the end of here, every single frame will have been tracked. Good? Okay, let's track forward. Let's see how well it did. Brilliant going back. Let's see how it does going forward, because I know there is a little bit of camera movement. Okay, still seems to be doing good. I promise you, if these boxes were slightly different, too small or too big, this track would not be anywhere near as accurate as this is. So I can't push this enough. You need to just make sure that your boxes are the right size for what you're trying to track. And if in whatever footage you've got, it's just crashing or stopping, just go right to the back and just set your track points. And I promise you, 9 times out of 10, that fixes it. On the odd occasion that it doesn't work, it's, well, the footage is garbage and it can't be tracked. But we live and learn. So we now have a successfully tracked piece of footage. What do we do now? Well, within here, we don't go anywhere until we apply this stabilization. Okay, so we're going to hit apply and it brings us up apply dimensions X and Y. The options are X only or Y only. We want X and Y. So X is going side by side. Y is up and down. If you only wanted to track the movement of going left and right, you'd say X only. Similarly, if you only wanted to track the up and down movement, you'd select Y. We want both, so let's hit OK. And now it's brought us out of that inner bit and we now have our footage stabilized. So let me just get to fit and let's play it back and see what we've got. So already you can see the start of this effect. You see it? It's looking good. But now we need to absolutely nail this lock-on effect. And what you've probably noticed is round here, we've got black. This is actually quite a dark scene. So I'm actually going to put a white solid behind. Remember like a color matte in Premiere Pro? Well, in After Effects, it's called solid. I know we've done one of these before because it names the color. Love that. I'm just going to drag that below so it really highlights what we're looking at. So if I take that right to the beginning and play that through again, as you can see, now that we've got white behind it, there's a lot of movement there, but her head is completely still. Now I can already foresee that we might have a little bit of problems with regards to how close this is coming to the top of her head, but let's see what we can do. So let's get somewhere where I think it's the most drastic. I'd say maybe about there. Okay. So we're going to have this and we're going to use this as our kind of like setting for where we're going to set this video. And to move this now, we select our clip and we twirl up and then twirl back down, and it gives us everything. And then we twirl down to look at our transform. There's an easy way to do that. Let me close up again and I'm going to hit P on the keyboard for position. Boom, we have our position. I also want to show the scale. So I hit S on the keyboard, but position goes away. Well, we can show them both at the same time. How? Well, just like in any other software where you hold down Shift and select multiple things. Well, we just select that and we've got scale there. So if I hold Shift and press P, we now have position and scale right there. So we don't have all of this to deal with. I mean, if we had everything open, and you can imagine the different kind of effects, it all comes down here and it gets really busy really quickly. So close that up, remembering that you don't hold Shift until the second thing that you want to show. If I hold down Shift and press P, it doesn't show anything. That's because it's not to show it as well as anything else. So we hit P on the keyboard first and then hit Shift and S, and we have both position and scale. Top tip. Okay, so let's scale this up. And now we're going to, that's just with the scale there. And we can either use this position or we can just drag it because it's selected. I've brought up position here, not only to show you, but also so we can do some fine tuning. And I want her there. Let's just turn on our title action safe grid. And okay, I think I'm as close as I can kind of get, really. I'd like her further down, but the way that it's been shot, there's not that much headroom above her. Again, if you're shooting this and this is your footage, you don't really want your talent that close to the top of the actual of the frame. I mean, it's fine when she's down here, but as she goes up, she's really close to the top of the frame. You want to give them what's called headroom, which kind of does what it says on the tin. So if I've got that there, I kind of want her, I'm going to move her over a little bit just so her ear is in line with the center. Good. And let's see how that looks. So I'm going to go home and press, let's take off those action and press play. Got no headroom coming in. That looks good. And there you go. There's that lock-on effect. All done. How good is that? So how do we get this back into Premiere Pro? Well, we just Control S, go back into Prem, and now this will be updated. It's not updated just yet. There we go. We're updated. And just to absolutely nail this on, we in and out. And I always pre-render. I'm just one of those. I had laser eye surgery done many years ago, and it's purely because I want everything in absolutely perfect focus all the time. And I'm no different with my video editing. So taking that back, and yeah, it's good. And the beauty of this is I can actually show you now, because these are two separate. If I disable this for a second, she's back there. I can just maybe shorten this a bit and play them both. I'd have to pre-render. It doesn't take that long. And if that's the original, which looks great, and if that's the effect you're going for, great. But if you want a lock-on effect, right there. And that is how to get the lock-on effect nice and easily in just a few steps.